Okay, I want to thank people for coming to the Wolfram Technology Conference and for viewing this talk. I'm doing this talk live during the conference. My name is John Foltz. I'm Director of User Interface Technology with Wolfram Research. I typically give a talk every year about the state of the notebook front end and what we've been doing and a little bit about what's coming. This is my talk for 2021. So just a little bit of an introduction to the talk. I'm going to talk about some new features that we have. I'm going to talk about updated platform support. And I'm going to give a little peek at some stuff that's coming post 13. And when I say stuff that's coming, I mean stuff that we've actually been working on quite steadily through the 13 development cycle, but did not quite make it for the cut for 13. So I'm confident these are things that I'm confident will come in the next release, which we anticipate sometime in spring, well before we have another technology conference. So, and if you're a pre-release person, you might see it even sooner. A few ground rules for the talk. Feel free to ask questions in the Pathable chat, but I will not be looking at the questions during my talk. But they'll queue up. I'll get a chance to look at them after I'm finished. I'll probably run most or all of my time, and then I'll stick around, and for as long as the Zoom session remains open, I'll go ahead and answer questions that are there, or if you want to send more questions until either they're finished or Zoom cuts me off, which might happen. If you don't get your questions answered, we have front-end team office hours. It's tomorrow at 2 p.m. And I will be there, and much of my team will be there, and I really hope to see you there and get some good questions. Love to have discussion with people who are using our technology. And also there will be the files already uploaded in Pathable, but if you're not in Pathable, looking at this by some other means, there's a QR code at the end that will link to cloud published version of this notebook. So let's get started. So there isn't so much a particular theme. This is a sort of a potpourri of a set of features. I did not mean to leave those cells in. Let's start there. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is something it's not on by default yet, although we think we will turn it on by default before we ship 13. And this is in 12.3. So if you're running 12.3, you can already do this. So this is in the preferences dialog, in the interface tab. There's a checkbox down here, automatically insert matching delimiters while typing. Stephen demoed this yesterday, if you were watching Stephen's talk. And so basically, here's what it's about. If I want to go ahead and type brackets, I typed the open bracket and I got the closed bracket automatically. And let me talk a little bit about how this works. If I press backspace, it detects that I'm backspacing something that was automatically paired. So it goes ahead and deletes both sides. So if I type and I can keep going with list braces and typing contents and so on. So this is using a set of heuristics to figure out when is a good time to do this and when would be a frustrating time to do this. If this feature were always turned on, it would be mega frustrating. So if, for example, I want to wrap F with a function and I wanted to do something like H of that, if it auto inserted at this point, the matching, well, there's a significant ambiguity here. Would you have wanted the closing square bracket to go right here, before the F, or would you have wanted it to wrap around this whole thing? Or maybe even if I were to, for example, if I were to type it inside of here, should it have gone around? Am I typing in a new element? Am I typing in something like that? Or am I typing in h of 2? Or maybe I'm typing in h of 2 comma 3. Maybe I'm doing some editing. So this is something that can't be stupid. It has to have some decent heuristics, and I think that we've done that. So and so basically we have something that that works, and it works with strings as well. So, or comments. And here's a complete list of the operators that it works with. Just the operators that are ASCII, matching ASCII operators. So this is very much about keyboard typing here, and so so we didn't add it for the various long name or alias sorts of operators, most of which don't get used in kind of normal authoring of code anyway. And you may have seen when I was doing the typing there that that when I typed in the comment, it started with an auto match paren, and then it auto matches the stars, and then I can just type. And if I so association, of course, less than doesn't match greater than. That would make sense, but when you type in the pipe, now it figures to match both. If I backspace, it undoes it. Okay, so and how do you, once you're inside this, so if I'm typing this again, I mean, what was I doing? Okay, so so I'm just typing as I normally would have. So I literally type X and I type a closed square bracket, and similarly here, and I type a close curly. Now I could have typed a right arrow, that would have been fine, and we'll add, Stephen misspoke yesterday, it's control space is the keyboard shortcut. It's not there in 12.3, but in 13 we'll add control space to allow you to kind of escape out through structure without having to precisely replicate the matching things, or without having to move your fingers over to the arrow keys. So that's auto matching delimiters. Stephen also talked about coding ligatures. Let me talk a little bit about the motivation for this. So we've always done some sort of character replacements. And so, for example, and actually, I think I have a 12. Do I have a 12.2 sit? Yeah, I have a 12.2 sitting around here. So yeah, for example, in 12.2, if I do that, and then if we look at the underlying representation, I'm going to toggle show cell expression here so we can see the underlying representation. So this actually got changed into a rule character, and so that's we've had that feature for many years, but it was limiting. There were some limits on it. So what kind of limits are we talking about? Well, so it's a bit problematic with some characters, like with some operators, because they're shorter versions of other operators. Okay, so the equal is a shorter version of equal, and the tricky bit is to figure out, when do we know for sure that you've committed to equal and aren't going to type that third equal. So matching operators is a problem. The left double bracket there doesn't actually match just 2 right brackets. That's a syntax error. And frankly, we would very much like to have double bracket collapse, because it helps to pick out of a mess of brackets, which particularly on the closing side, which of those brackets refer to a part style closing rather than a function closing. So the new method is known as a ligature because it's not actually changing what you type. It's preserving exactly what you type. It's just drawing it differently. So the ligature is basically tying 2 or more characters together visually into a single character. But what you typed is still there underneath. So if I type in A dash greater than B, and notice that it immediately displayed as a rule there. Now, if I look underneath, oh, I don't have sorry, the font is not very large here, but this is still represented underneath as a dash greater than. Just looks like a rule. And in fact, if I backspace through it, and I backspace once, and now it's peeling it off character by character. And that's a representation that this is just a visual substitution. It's not a substitution in the core data there. Okay, so one of the really nice things about this is that it automatically tracks part brackets as you type them. So I've typed in 2 brackets and with the auto matching, and I got the double brackets automatically. So there's my part. But in fact, if I do something, there's no confusion if I say wrap a G around it and wrap an H around that, and there's no confusion. It's not going to try to auto collapse these guys because these guys are not closing a part bracket. In fact, I could even further go and edit this, and using my arrow key, of course, I can split this apart. And I could type in, say, an F1. And when I've done so, I've changed the meaning of everything, and it automatically figures this out. So, and it can do that because it didn't actually change the underlying brackets in the first place at all. Okay, so that's coding ligatures. So this is a small thing, but quite useful. I'm a big fan of the iconization features that we have. And this was also something that Stephen mentioned a little bit. I'm going to go into just a bit more detail. So the in 12.2, let me just show a couple of examples in 12.2. The behavior could sometimes be a little silly if I try to do this and I try to iconize and I get a beep. I don't think you can hear that, but I got a beep. And I could maybe stare at that a bit and say, well, why did I get a beep? And I got a beep because I selected that extra comma, because it's like, well, that you can't put a comma at the end of a sequence. Okay, that's a little pedantic. So yeah, we fixed that. Now, if I put the comma at the end of the sequence, it's going to be fine. But what was even more alarming was that there were some places where it could actually corrupt the expression. So here's an example of this. And so let's say that I start selecting here, and maybe I select to here. Maybe I'm just not very precise about my selection, and one would like a world of accessible user interfaces not to require extreme precision, of course, but I go ahead and iconize this, and that looks a little suspicious. That really looks suspicious. And in fact, if we evaluate it, we see that it turned into something completely different. It treated this whole thing as a product. That's alarming. So we don't like that. And so we spent some real effort figuring things out. The comma thing, by the way, that was done in 12.3, but this is new to 13. So now if I do something similar, and what it's going to do, it will attempt to find some variation of that selection, possibly making it a bit larger, that would successfully iconize it without changing the meaning of it. It might fail. If it does fail, it will still beep. But if it's just completely ambiguous, how to put together a good selection from this. But let me go ahead and iconize. Okay, and so in this case, it actually it took the term in front of it so that it wouldn't be confused about the minus sign. And then it finished the A to the 6, B to the 4th term. And indeed, of course, this evaluates correctly exactly what we expect. Okay. This is something else that Stephen mentioned briefly. I wanted to go into just a bit more detail. So Wolfram Alpha Notebook Edition, particularly for those who are working with students, whether educators or parents, I hope this is something that you've been looking at. Some very interesting stuff going on here, and it really lowers the bar for using Wolfram language. But Wolfram Alpha this year added this math input feature. This is just, I just took these snapshots off the website. And so when you go to Wolfram Alpha, you can see the math input there, and you click on it, and you get this interface with these tab selectors that allow you to go to different sets of typesetting, and you can start typing stuff in. And so this was a lot of work to do on the website. I mean, this is just a huge amount of effort, but the notebook front end knows how to do typesetting. So for us, it was pretty easy. And so we decided, well, we can take the thing that they spent many months on, and a whole team. We'll put one person on it for maybe for 6 or 8 weeks, and reproduce their exact thing. And so this is Wolfram Alpha Mode Notebook in 13. It looks a lot like it did previously, but it has this new typesetting button. And so this these interfaces, these are basically the same thing, the exact same thing that you would see on the website. So if you're familiar with the website, you've gotten used to the website, there will be no learning curve working inside of a notebook. This will be very natural. And so if I want to do, for example, I want to do a plot. So I just started typing in plot, and then say I want to do, the 4th root of 1 over x. I press enter, and it's tiny little buglets that I neglected to deal with. But yeah, so there's a result, and I can go back and edit this. I can add more typesetting, and of course we have our own typesetting gestures, keyboard shortcuts, that kind of thing. But in this case, we tried very hard to make a system that works exactly like the web. So there would be no learning curve at all between them. Okay. I'm not going to go too deep into this here because there's going to be other talks about this, but I did want to mention it. This is something we spent a lot of effort in our group working on. So we had this thing called AxisObject, and AxisObject is now a primitive that represents an axis. So axes have always previously been represented as options to the graphics or graphics 3D. Well, so now we have a primitive, and one of the consequences of doing a primitive is that now we have something that allows supporting multiple axes. And also we have specifications that make things very easy. So I was very easily able to say, this axis runs from 2 to 3, but it should be scaled from 0 to 1. That was quite easy. axes can be curved. So making something like a semicircle. I suppose it's not technically a semicircle, it's a spline, but something close to a semicircle. Quite straightforward. Or you can just be very silly about it. The point being that that the specification is very powerful and allows you to do some amazing things or some silly things. And part of the specification, it's much easier now to deal with tick placement, including automated forms of tick placement, so you don't have to do it all yourself, with the scaling of the axes, the labeling of the axes, and so on. And so I encourage you to, there are 2 talks tomorrow that are going to touch on this. James Lane is going to be giving a talk on front-end graphics tomorrow, and this is going to be one of the things he'll bring up. And then Min Xuan is going to be giving a talk really quite focused on both some kernel and front-end stuff around axes. So if that's something you're interested in, you definitely should attend those talks. Okay, so another thing that I want to bring up, Stephen mentioned this, but I want to go into a bit more detail. Okay, so local documentation is now optional. Now, if you really love local documentation, don't freak out. You can still have it. It won't be a problem. Basically what we've done is we've always shipped the product in 1 mega installer, which is a pretty huge download. If you download the actual full install, it's several gigabytes. And so we've now broken it up into a documentation installer and a product installer. And the documentation installer works with any of our products, whether you're using Mathematica or Wolf Desktop or whatever. It's one set of documentation that works with any of our products. If you do not install the documentation, then so I say this, but I should demonstrate what I mean. So searches happen locally, but most documentation hits an open web browser. Okay, so what do I mean by that? And so let me switch over to, if I can find, here we go. Yeah, okay, so this is a help viewer from a local build of 13.1, which is the development version of the thing we're going to ship next spring. And I don't have documentation installed for 13.1. Well, then why are we looking at a help page? What's up with that? Okay, so if you don't have documentation installed, you still get the main root guide page here. Why would we do that? Well, we do that because documentation isn't just system documentation. You might have packlets installed that add documentation, for example, and we're not going to have all of your packlets on our web server. So it will certainly have our stuff on our web server. So if I look up plot, for example, and this happened off. Okay, and I apologize for the interruption. My my headset keeps wanting to time out. Okay, so there we go. There's our documentation. It direct hits to whatever's on the web. And all of the documentation will work like that for the system documentation. But the let's say, for example, I wanted to do, so here's something that I happen to know will produce mixed results on my system. That doesn't right tree. Okay, so I'm just doing a search. The searches will always return local if they're not a direct hit. Well, in this case, so I have one thing that comes from a local packlet, this get right tree. So this is GitLink I have installed. And we don't have that on our central servers. But then there are other things which we do have, like write. So write is a system symbol. So if I click the GitLink one, that takes me to the local documentation. And if I click the, let me put this back on screen so you can see it. And so if I click write instead, now it opens up a new page. Okay, so that's a little bit about how it works. Documentation for English, Japanese, and Chinese will be available. And so the way this works is that you don't ever have to worry about finding mismatched documentation. We're going to be looking at the first two components of the version number there. And so if you've installed 13.0 documentation, then it will be found by all 13.0 products. Would not be found by 13.1. That's a major increment. But for a minor increment, such as 13.01, whatever, the documentation can be reused. So that means you can upgrade when you can choose to upgrade the documentation and the products independently. And it's just a lot more convenient. If you definitely just want to keep things the way they were, you just want to have documentation plus product installed. As you may know, when you go to the user portal, you get a download manager. The download manager is like a very thin download, which then goes off and fetches the actual installers and run them. And this is the way that we've been working for a while. So we will have download managers which install both product and documentation in sequence automatically. So you can just download a single download manager and run the whole thing once. This is, for any of you in the pre-release program, this is really useful. I mean, it's, I'm doing product updates in download plus install and having the whole thing done within the course of several minutes, including the download time. So very nice. I want to talk about Mac OS. So we've been shipping Apple Silicon version of Mathematica Wolfram Desktop, and that's worked out very well. But you have to, the way we built it for 12.3, you have to know which you have. Do you have Apple Silicon or do you have Intel? Well, Apple, it's interesting because Apple's kind of fuzzing the line. And I think we're moving into a world where people may not even really know which they have anymore. Certainly, there's nothing on the machine. If I sit down on a machine that's not mine, there's nothing at the machine that says Intel Inside or Apple Silicon. So, so it's kind of inconvenient and maybe a bit technical to figure out which one you have. So we're working on a universal bundle, and that will be how 13 is done. So 13 will be just one Mac app that you download for both products. There's a lot of overlap between the two. Obviously, some of the binaries are different, but for example, the MX files and layout are all shared because MX files are common for 64-bit architectures. There are some fat binaries, and library link modules have special directories. If you're building a library link module, you might want to be aware of this, that you can create your own thing with different libraries for different products. Okay. Operating system support. Lots of new operating systems coming out right now. This is the season. And yes, we support Mac OS 12 Monterey. We support it for 12.3. We support it for 13. Windows 11, same story. We're supporting the latest versions of Linux for 13. We're upping our versions of Ubuntu and Debian and Fedora, among others. By the way, don't forget that we have a player front end on iOS, and it's working under iOS 15 just fine. And there are lots of system things going on. I just wanted to call out a couple of system things related to rendering. So under Windows, we have, it's been a very long project migrating away from the way that Windows drawing used to work in the 90s. So Windows has an old system and a new system of drawing. The old system is called GDI, and the new system is called Direct Write. And it's because, of course, we're a product that's been around for a long time. We were heavily invested in GDI for a long time, and it's taken us a while to move away. So this gets us some new features, some better subpixel anti-aliasing fonts, for example. It gets us some speed and some some performance enhancements and taking advantage of better advantage of the of some of the hardware for 2D rendering. And also we've had a number of problems from old unmaintained software that is on your system side by side with us that has just been causing issues. So so getting GDI out of the picture, very helpful. And iOS, big change there. We've been using OpenGL for iOS 3D rendering. Now we're using Metal, basically taking advantage of code that we'd written for macOS a couple versions ago and finally porting it to iOS. Okay. And I am just about over my time. There's, I don't want to, you know, I have some sneak peek stuff. So this requires a little bit of explanation though. So I think I'm just going to mostly stop here. I don't have a lot to show here. So we're heavily working on a toolbar. It's very interesting. The implications. It's not just going to be a toolbar though. It changes fundamentally how we handle messages. I'm very excited about that. We were very close to getting full Unicode graphing cluster support. And basically what this means is, so the way Unicode represents some characters, they're not just a single thing. So they're not just a single code, they're multiple codes. And here's one of the more amusing examples where flags, oops, I should have tested this under Windows. Yeah, so on a Mac machine, this would actually render as a US flag, but in fact, it's actually 2 characters. And so, yeah, so that's we were really close to getting support for that. It's just a few weeks away, but it didn't quite make it for 13. And we're actively working on dark mode support. We know you want it. We're actively working on it. So some bits and pieces in 13, but not enough to really be able to turn it on. Okay, so that's what I have. And with that, I'm going to see what, if any, questions have been coming through. Okay, so got a question about syntax coloring added for user global and notebook context symbols. Let me just read it. Can a syntax color be added for user global and notebook context symbols? Purple, perhaps. So there is actually already syntax coloring for let me bring up another notebook here. Here we go. So there is actually syntax coloring already for global, and this is done on a per context basis. So so let me just pump up the magnification on that, and you can see A plus B. So where did that come from? And you know, the interesting thing is if I give A a value, and now it turns black. And it does this because it's in the global context. And there is an option for doing this. And I'm trying to remember what the option is. I may not remember it immediately. Let's see. Oh yeah, I think is it highlight symbol context? Let's see, but here we go. Symbol context styles. That's what it is. Okay, so so current value of, actually, let's do evaluation notebook. Auto style options of Symbol context styles. Okay. And so I think then if I were to, let's do global equals font color red. Did that work? Let's see. So yeah, look at that. That's if it's defined though. If it's undefined, if it's an undefined symbol, it's coming from elsewhere. And that is, yeah, there's an undefined symbol style as well. Along with symbol context styles, there's also an undefined symbol style. So I didn't have to use global. I could have added my own context and done it there. So yeah. Okay. Let's see. Phil Ramsden asks, I've noticed a slight tendency for the cursor to land in the middle of a ligature when you click, and this is rarely what you want. I agree. So the ligature will break apart when you backspace through it or when you arrow through it. In 12.3, it also potentially breaks apart when you type into it. Or when you click into it. So I can click in the middle and break it apart. This wasn't obvious until we'd used it for a while, but yes, I agree. I think this is probably not the right behavior, and the clicking behavior we're not going to allow it to break apart. That's going to be changed for 13. Okay. It would be nice to add a label to an iconized expression after the fact. And yes, I completely agree. That is on our list. Yes, to be able to click and iconize and interactively iconize it. Okay. Phil Ramsden says that my Axis example wasn't totally silly, so he loves it. Good. Glad to hear that. Let's see. So with web documentation, will you still be able to download a particular page for interactivity or view it as a cloud notebook? Off the top of my head, so I don't know if it's available as a cloud notebook or not. I don't think it is, but certainly the copy and paste is you'll be able to copy, or you can right now actually copy and paste directly into a notebook, and it's high fidelity. It gives you the exact expression you were looking for. It's not a translation that sometimes doesn't evaluate or something like that. So there is at least that. And of course, you can always use the local documentation if for some reason you want to get the full notebook. Will you be able to load specific doc pages into the system? Maybe I only care about the machine learning pages. Not now, but that's a good question. So yeah, that's not something that's on tap for 13. But yes, that's a good question. Okay, are we still broadcasting?
We are, but it'll probably end any moment.
Okay. That's my Pathable session just changed to another state, so I want to make sure. Okay. On macOS, any chance we'll get fading scroll bars or touch bar support? Touch bar, that's yeah, there have been a lot of interesting discussions around the touch bar. I think some of them might have even shown up in a live stream somewhere. Some people think it's utterly useless. Some people think it's awesome. But there, even the people who would, who think it's awesome, there's some real questions. What would be useful on the touch bar? Be interested to hear your ideas. Fading scroll bars, bring that up in the front end office hours. I'm not remembering what our thoughts there are off the top of my head. Okay. Please show the kernel sneak peek. Let's see the oh, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Sorry. Let's see. Could Mathematica ever have multi-cursor editing? Yes, it's on our roadmap. This will happen. I'm not 100% certain exactly when, but it's we already have a plan for how this is going to work, and I think some aspects of that plan will come to fruit in 13.1. Whether the whole thing, if you're familiar with Sublime or VS Code, whether that level of support will be available in 13.1, I'm skeptical whether we'll get that much, but I think we'll get some aspects of it. It's a process. So there are definitely people who are very interested in this inside the company. So yes, it's going to happen. Any updates to real-time ray tracing? So we still have the experimental ray tracer in the macOS front end only, and so far it's not clear that there's going to be enough general interest in it to merit a big development project around it. But if you violently disagree, then please say so. That's how we find out whether or not there's interest. Okay. What is a possibility for multiple views of the same front end, such as if you have multiple screens wanting to look at separate parts of a notebook simultaneously, copy, cut, paste between the views? Yeah, we've been thinking about that, and I don't anticipate that will happen in the short-term future. I agree, it's a very interesting question. And it would be nice to have views where like a split window, but for the same document. You make edits on one side, the edits automatically update on the other side, and so on. Yeah, and there's some support for that. Let's see. There's a request for support for continuous smooth scrolling. I think we could look into that. Let's see. And my headset timed out one last time. Hopefully I won't have to do that again. Is there any way to make the documentation always open all without having to press the open all button? Also, is there any way not to have to click to open the details and options section? You know what? I agree with you. I wish things were maybe not all of the example sections, but I wish the details and options section were open by default. I fought this battle and I lost. And obviously there are different opinions from different folks on this. I can tell you what I do when I want to see everything is, let me bring up just a random page here. So what I do when I want to see everything is I do so there's keyboard shortcuts for select all. Select all is Control A under Windows. It's Command A on Mac, and there's a keyboard shortcut for opening all groups. So you can open all subgroups with Control curly. So actually Control Shift open bracket. And so this is something I do is Control A, Control Shift, and there we go. and everything's open. So maybe not the best answer to your question, but it's something that works for me. Okay. And I think we're coming close to the end of questions. Oh, and someone else actually popped in with the same solution. And some more support for ray tracing, and that runs the list of questions. So please come back to the office hours tomorrow, and it won't just be me rambling on there. You'll hear lots of other voices from my team and from other people in the company who use the front end. So thank you very much for your time. Have a great day.